Welcome to a journey through the history of art. We will travel along a timeline from the caves to the 19th century. My name is Dr. Jeanne Willette. Let's begin by making the familiar unfamiliar. We travel to the pyramids along the Nile. In ancient Egypt, the culture was entirely dependent upon the ebb and flow of the Nile River, which coursed from south to north. Once again, we have the concept of a theocracy, this time a god-king, a pharaoh who, upon his death, becomes the god Horus. Although the ancient Egyptians undoubtedly lived and loved and enjoyed being alive, what we know best about them is their culture of death and afterlife, and their culture of power. Egyptian pharaohs maintained huge public building projects that kept their subjects occupied and employed, too busy to rebel or to question their endless subservience to a lifetime of hard labor, all to the glory of their kings and queens. If you were a laborer on the pyramids, you were probably a farmer during planting and harvesting times, and during the off-season you worked on the pharaoh's tomb. For some, the labor required little beyond brute strength. For others, some measure of skill was required to dress and fit the massive stones for the pyramids together. But all the workers were guided by the vision of the architects and engineers who imagined monuments of glory and death in these massive tombs. Although the Egyptians communicated copiously through a colorful written language, hieroglyphics, we are astonishingly ignorant of how the pyramids were built. Today, the pyramids are rough and dangerous ruins, stepped mountains, now stripped of their polished limestone coverings. But in their day, these structures were magnificently precise, architectural marvels, engineered to the point of art. Egypt was a large empire stretched out along the Nile, the banks of which were punctuated by cities, but the entire society was collectively involved in the vast religious and civic enterprise of securing the successful death and resurrection of the pharaoh and his nobles. The sculptures ranged in scale from monumental to miniature, scaled up or down, and carved according to convention, static, hieratic poses. The ruling class stiffly standing or sitting, immobilized by their own nobility. Occasionally, a foot is thrust forward, but with no impact on the rest of the body. Occasionally, there is an exchange of a human touch, but never a human expression, and rarely a likeness. Like sculpture, painting did not change as centuries passed. Although experts can tell the differences between the old, middle, and new kingdoms, the basic conventions were retained. Painting consisted of a system of schema, an array of conventions, followed faithfully by generations of artists. The human body was constructed like a hieroglyph, composed of the most legible views of the face, features, and body parts, allowing the posture or position to be read like a morphological text. Sculptors and painters, like their builder counterparts, worked in teams, each group specializing in a singular activity. For example, painting inside the tombs began with drawing the outlines, which were then carved out. Only then were the forms filled in and colored and given details. Much of what has come down to us as Egyptian art is art for the tombs, art that could be sealed away at the death of the pharaoh. The entire process was segmented, beginning with a designer, continued through overseers, and carried out by a sequence of artists. It is unlikely that any of the artisans ever saw the completed work, and the concepts of creation, innovation, invention were unknown. Those who participated in decorating tombs, writing the papyrus books for the dead, crafting the many objects deemed necessary for the afterlife, were skilled and trained artisans. Their work was remarkable, but bound by a set of rigid rules. They made cultural artifacts, yes, but they were not artists in the modern sense. The makers were a collective, but not yet individuals. However, individual artists would emerge, and certain cultural makers were proud enough to self-consciously sign their names. This site of individuality, of humanism, is ancient Greece.